Yeah. Yes, everyone take that in. That's fine. And we need more space here. Sorry.
It's just so we can see it.
Yeah, there's more space. Please move.
You need to push my colleagues.
Yep. Yes, no.
Yep.
You were in the one way. Sorry.
Please.
One step back now.
One step.
One step, please.
One step now.
I went back.
Marina? I have to feed.
There's literally 5 of us already.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. This is an amazing moment, kicking off the 50th anniversary of Davos with this extraordinary group of young people. I'm told it's the youngest panel WEF has ever convened, except for me. And two notes with that in mind. One is I want to try and I have some questions, but I also want to let the panelists ask questions of one another. What can they learn from each other, and what can we learn from them as they learn from each other? So we'll see how that goes. And then also, we'll leave a little time at the end. There's a new system here at WEF for questions from the audience, which is supposed to be on the screen here, so you can see. There you go. WEF.ch/ask. So if you want to ask a question, go to that site, and we'll take maybe 10 minutes or so at the end for that. To open, though, my colleagues at Time have put together a short video introducing the panelists so you can see them in action out in the world, and then we'll get to it.
I want my descendants to know I use my voice so they can have a future.
Like, I don't think you have to be old enough to be able to have an impact in people's lives.
I would like to tell my grandchildren that we did everything we could, and we did it for them, for the generations to come.
In the fight against climate change, corruption, inequality, and injustice, a new generation of leaders are raising their voices, becoming a force of hope around the globe. We are pleased to introduce 16-year-old Salvador Gómez-Colón, who's leading a campaign to help communities without power in storm-damaged Puerto Rico. And Greta Thunberg, who sparked a global demand for leaders to act on climate change.
The world is waking up.
She began her one-person strike for climate in 2018. Last September, millions had joined in to form the largest climate demonstration in human history. Natasha Mwansa used her role as a junior reporter to track and expose practices like child marriage to protect women and girls in her native Zambia.
What we want and what is actually provided, and what is promised and what is actually done.
And 16-year-old Autumn Peltier, who spent her last 8 years advocating for clean drinking water in Canada's First Nation communities and around the world.
I don't want to come back when I'm 70 and nothing has been done.
Okay, thanks. Greta, I'd like to start with you. You, as the film mentioned, it's been about 1.5 years since you did your solo strike. What progress do you feel has been made in that time, and what needs to happen next?
Well, it depends on how you see it, of course. In one aspect, lots have happened that no one could have predicted, that this has sort of sparked a general awareness and the movement, of course. I mean, of course, it was not only me, but all these many young people from many different places pushing together to form this alliance of movements. And of course that is a huge step, because that, I mean, as I said, people are more generally aware now. It's and people, it seems like it's the climate and environment is a hotter topic right now, and a lot thanks to young people pushing. But of course, if you see it from another perspective, or pretty much nothing has been done since the global emissions of CO2 has not reduced. And that is, of course, what we are trying to achieve, among other things. I mean, we're all fighting for the environment and the climate, and if you see it from that aspect, what has concretely been done, I mean, if you see it from a bigger perspective, then basically nothing. So, but that, of course, we had expected. It will require much more than this. This is just the very beginning.
What would you like to see happen in the next 1.5 years?
Oh, a lot, but especially that we start listening to the science, and that we actually start treating these crises as the crisis it is, as the crises they are, because this is, without treating this as a real crisis, we cannot solve it, and then we cannot see this from a holistic view.
Autumn, you confronted really Justin Trudeau a couple of years ago about water protection, issues around water protection. Did he listen to you? Do you feel he listened to you? And what's happened on that front since?
Well, I can't exactly. Well, since then, I feel like I made an impact on children that are younger than me and older than me, and I feel that I've seen a lot more youth standing up, and I feel like me doing that kind of maybe even gave them the courage to, like, use their voice, because I think I was only 12 when that happened, and I think that was really empowering for me, actually. And then when I look at it from, I guess you could say, Canadian perspective, since I've done that, I feel like there has been change, because the Canadian government actually, well, his Canadian government is actually working really hard towards trying to resolve the boil water advisories in First Nations communities. And since then, I know it was one of their goals, I guess, and it was to resolve the boil water advisories, and he is doing that. But the only issue with that is every time one is resolved, a new one occurs. So it's kind of continuous. But I know in Canada they are trying to make change.
One of the questions on my mind is how you go from protests and panels to policy change. And you've got a formal role now, right? Will you tell the audience about, you've got a seat at the table in a sense, yeah.
Well, I'm the Chief Water Commissioner for Anishinabek Nation, and basically what Anishinabek Nation is the Indigenous people in Ontario, and that's kind of the form of Indigenous government there. And so basically my auntie, Josephine Mindaman, she was the Chief Water Commissioner prior to me, before she passed away, and they felt that it was best that they passed the role on to me, as I was following in her footsteps and doing her work. And so what the role really is advocating for the Great Lakes in Canada, well, not exactly all in Canada, but advocating for the Great Lakes, and kind of having a say at the table when decisions are made for them. And so that's kind of what my role is.
Salvador, you first became really active after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, now earthquakes. What have you seen, in terms of your work and the results you're after in that period of time? Progress or not?
I mean, I think that it's definitely been a tough few years for Puerto Rico. With our natural disasters in 2017, our protests in the summer our protests in the summer this summer, right, and the earthquakes now. I think that one of the main issues that I think we started to see, since I started Light and Hope for Puerto Rico in 2017 after Maria, is that there's definitely been much more passion and much more knowledge with youth, right? We've been much more active. There was a climate strike in Puerto Rico the day of the International Climate Strike, right, which is all led by youth, and it was taken to the Capitol. There's also been much more, friends of mine and peers of mine, students, that are also, taking charge to help neighboring islands, right, like the Bahamas and the Virgin Islands. I think that in terms of natural disaster preparedness, which I think is a reality of the climate crisis that we need to address and is not being addressed, we haven't really gotten in much places, right? Very recently, they've discovered warehouses of emergency supplies in Puerto Rico that were untouched even after the earthquakes first started. And that has been, one of the great examples in which we have the help, but it's not getting to people, right? I think it's definitely, there's a lot of issues wrong with it, and in a lot of ways it's because things are being politicized, right? And the issue is that the climate crisis and natural disasters aren't political issues, they're not socioeconomic issues, they're not a racial issue. Climate change and climate crisis just is, right? And until we start addressing that fact, we won't be getting much places.
We talked some before the session about mentors and reverse mentors, and I know you've spoken some about the lessons from youth resilience in Puerto Rico. Can you talk about that a little?
I mean, I think that the biggest thing in Puerto Rico was that, we were all impacted after Hurricane Maria, right? The whole island was in a 100% blackout. We were all facing our fair share of challenges, right? In my case, my house was flooded. I was living with my grandparents in my apartment and all that. But that was minimal, right? I kind of took that charge and thought about other people who were less fortunate than me, right? In Puerto Rico, you think of Puerto Rico and you probably think of Old San Juan and Condado, which is very modern and very commercial, right? But you don't think of the hundreds of thousands of homes that are made of wood with metal roofs, right, which are on slants, right? And those are the most affected after Hurricane Maria, right? I think that in Puerto Rico, with all the fair share of natural disasters and political crises we've had, you've seen youth stepping up, and around the world, actually. We've seen our generation standing up for the world we want to see, for the vision of the world that we have, right? Even when our leaders aren't really taking charge, right? And I think that's a particular important lesson that we need to learn, is the fact that, we're not waiting 5, 10, 20 years to take the action we want to see. We're not the future of the world, we're the present, right? We're acting now. We're not waiting any longer.
Natasha, you've spoken about not wanting young people just to be beneficiaries, recipients of other people's decisions, but part of the decision-making. How has that played out in your experience, in your own causes?
Well, I think it has played out really well, and even if we look at the panel that we're having today, for instance, you find there's so many big conventions and meetings that people come to, and often a young person's voice is not necessarily heard. Before, that was the situation, but then now we come to these meetings and then we have resolutions, and those are actually taken seriously. So I do believe it's becoming an issue that's actually being heard, and we're not just seeing, young people are no longer just seeing as, they are young and they exist, but then we're actually being involved in the whole system, and we're being asked what we want to do. But not only that, we're able to step out and actually say, this is what we want, and either partner with us or we'll do it because we're powerful enough. So that's something that I have seen. And you can look at this amazing panel. I mean, they're doing all amazing things, and we haven't let our age stop us or wherever we come from. This is something that we've taken up. Another thing that's really been interesting is finding a way to actually have that intergenerational partnership. I like how you asked him about the mentorship issue. And I think it's very important because the older generation has a lot of experience, but we have ideas, we have energy, and we have solutions for the now problems and the ones that are coming up. So, we need to learn to collaborate. And this is something I think is really going on well. I have seen so many different countries, and even with the 12 teenage change makers that are here today, I have heard their stories of how they are ensuring that they are putting pressure on governments and everything like that. That's good. But then at the end of the day, we don't want to come to a point where we intimidate them too much, because right now they do have, let's just be honest, right now if you look at, for example, the UN Secretary General, he has a lot of power to implement the ideas that we have. And if you put us in a room together, what we best can do is ride on that power that he has, foster our agenda, but then partner, because we're not just going to tell you what's going to happen. We want to be involved from the start to the end, because it's going to benefit all of us. So my journey has been very interesting, actually, because right now my journey has been very interesting, especially back home. I run my own foundation, and we do exactly this. We amplify the voices of young people doing amazing things, and then also empower them to be able to step out, because like what was mentioned, sometimes all they need to know is just, you can do it. You don't have to be limited. And if someone like me, someone like Salvador or Greta is able to do it, then they can too. And so that's something we've been working on, and we look forward to doing a lot more. But otherwise, I think this is a really good start. It's a sign of hope, and we know that there's more that we can look forward to, and in being involved in these spaces. Yeah.
Oh, well said. I'll throw this out to the group. You've all met a lot of politicians on your journeys. Does it, do any of you have interest in politics? Do you think you have to be in politics to make change in government at some level? Or are you turned off?
I believe the political aspect of any society is very important, because they are the governing and administrative body. And I do believe that if someone is involved, if they do want to take up that career, it's a good place to implement change, because, you know, it's one thing, for instance, to come here, and many countries signed to the Paris Agreement on the carbon energy and reducing on the carbon that's being exhibited, that's being taken into the atmosphere. But then if you look at it, and people have signed to that, and then the people with the power to actually make that law back home are in the political and governing system. So you then realize that a law can actually determine whether something can move forward or not, because it's like you're backing. So I do believe it is important that we do have politicians changing the world as well and wanting to ensure that we foster ahead. But I don't believe that that's the only way that we can actually foster change. I don't believe the power lies in them. It lies in every individual discovering what they're supposed to do and then fostering that and deciding that they want to shape the change they want. So I personally want to want to maybe later on. I am interested in politics a lot. But then it's not something I would like to take up full-time, just probably, like I said, partnering with them a lot to ensure that we actually foster this agenda. So.
You talked about hope. Do you feel, as you're out in the world, that do you feel hope? Do you feel that you're being listened to, or how much, or is it lip service? From the adults, you meet so many politicians, so many business leaders. Are they really listening? Are we really listening?
It's good that you said, are we really listening? So, because at the end of the day, I do believe right now, we're living in a generation where we've got powerful voices and powerful minds, and put together, we can foster this powerful energy that can transform whatever society. But then, to be honest, I do have a lot of hope. I am very optimistic about what's going to happen and the change we're going to bring. But then sometimes it's not always that we're being heard. Sometimes it's coming to conventions and, you know, let's have young people speak on a panel. Let them bring out that energy. Later on, what happens? Where is the system that actually ensures that these young people are integrated? Because they do have ideas. And even if they don't have the skills, why not invest in those skills so they can be involved in governing bodies like she has? And it's very rare that we find someone like her. So if we really want to change the world, I feel this is a good start, yes, and I do believe that all of you are listening to me right now. But then it's beyond just me talking and having your ears out. It's actually acting and supporting me in this journey later on. What exactly are you going to do to ensure that what we say is going to be done back home? Because we're not going to be in Davos forever. But then back home also, and then just going back and having that system in place. So that's my major gap in all these things. We just don't have a proper system in place where young people are not just heard, but then their actions are supported and we're involved holistically in the system. So that's my answer. But we do have a lot of hope. I do have a lot of hope personally, and I believe with such powerful minds, who wouldn't have hope?
Salvador.
I mean, if I can just bounce off Natasha, what she said, I think it's really important how the fact that, we're here means that our voices are being heard, right? But overall, I think also the reason why we're here is because we're tired of empty promises. We're tired of too much talk, right? We're tired of too much coming to Davos and then going back and not doing anything, right? Because then the whole purpose of Davos is then not existent, right? But I think we have hope, right? I think that this is, the urgency of all the issues that we tackle is being heard, right? And I think that our presence here, it means a lot, not only at the 50th anniversary, but also at so many turning points and so many different crises that we're facing. But also the fact that, once again, we're not waiting to take action. We're doing it now, right? And one of the reasons, to answer your question, Ed, that I think that all of us are doing the work we have is because we've seen how politics in a lot of ways has been too much talk and too much, insatiability from politicians that they want to hyper-politicize everything, which in that case, that doesn't lead to a positive society, right? Because then we're not working for the common good, right? And I think that right now, as politics stand in terms of the whole world, it's very divisive. And I think that, our future generations will see this as a very divided and polarized world. But at the same time, I have hope that when we take the reins in a few years of our political systems, if the change and the transformation hasn't happened yet, we'll definitely be the ones to do that.
Yeah. Autumn, what are you, who's listening and who's not listening?
Well, I personally don't feel like that heard from politicians, I would say, but my local members of parliament, I do feel really heard because, for example, Michael Mantha, he's the MP of Algoma Manitoulin, and he's doing a lot of work to help me achieve my goals and around that area. And then, like, even Carolyn Bennett, she's doing a lot of stuff to help me be heard as well. But then when it comes to federal government, it's really hard to get their attention, be heard by them, because honestly, I would say they're all focused on just money, and we need to be more focused on the actual things going on, and that they're not thinking about the impacts and things that are happening. It's almost like they don't even believe that climate change is real. Like we all say, climate change is a real thing, and they're not realizing that. And basically, what we're all trying to do is convince them, trying to tell them they need to listen to us. And I just feel being a youth, we're not as heard as we can be in our potential. So.
Greta, has there been a moment this year where you felt I was heard? Obviously your message has been heard loudly, but where you felt like there was a turning point or somebody really was acting?
Well, it's different from being heard and from that should actually lead to something. I'm not the person who can complain about not being heard. I'm being heard all the time. But in general, the science and the voice of the young people it's not in the center of the conversation, and it needs to be, because this is about, I mean, of course it's about us and our future and future generations, and of course those who are already being affected today, but especially we also need to bring the science into the conversation, because that is what this is all about.
Natasha, is there a moment that just in your work where you just, hey, it happened, it clicked, I made a difference?
Yes, there was a moment. There was a summit on ending child marriages that took place in Ghana. I think in 2018 towards the end of it. And so I was asked to give the opening speech, which was the opening ceremony, and then just express what exactly I would like for African girls in terms of, our sexuality, our reproductive health, and everything just to do with that. And so after that speech, I did go back home and we started organizing different groups. I worked with different NGOs and would go in communities and would advocate and raise awareness on these issues. But then what really struck me the most is how I mentioned something on menstrual health, for instance, and then it was actually implemented. Like, that's something we started seeing in different countries happening. And then I mentioned how we need to increase budgetary allocations towards sexual reproductive health. And of course, the allocations were not as high as I wanted them to go, but then it's something that we saw happening and the progress was made. And then later on, I actually got my hands on an article, and it attributed the speech that I had given and the work that I was doing, having helped thousands of girls get rescued from teenage marriages and rehabilitation processes being put in place for them to actually be able to get away, like from the teenage pregnancies and recover from all that. So, of course, it wasn't just Natasha Mwansa alone because of what, but then it attributed that speech and some of the things I said and some of what the leaders had actually pointed out from that speech and how they got those commitments and took them home and decided to act on it. So for me, that was a revolutionary moment because I only saw the article this year, and that was in 2018, actually late last year. And so I do believe that it's on such platforms, yes, that we can be heard, and there are leaders that we can influence and all that. But then, the action is what, like what she said, it's the action that actually counts. And so for me, that was like the highlight. I couldn't stop smiling because in as much as there were many other voices and of course many other actors and players towards that success, the fact that I was a voice that was a part of that solution was a big thing for me. And so that was like my moment. I was happy with that.
That's great. Salvador, anything in your experience?
I mean, I think
like that?
Yeah, I think that with my work with Light and Hope, I really got to see a lot of Puerto Rico that I hadn't seen, right? Puerto Rico, it's a very small island, right? Pretty much everyone goes to the same places, same beaches, same restaurants, people in the metro area, it's pretty limited, right? But you drive 10 minutes away from my house, and you start getting to communities that I'd never been to, and to communities that are living way, way lower under the poverty line. And it's impressive because we see a lot of different, we paint a lot of pictures that are not true, right? And I think in my work in Puerto Rico, I went to a lot of households that, people were just living in ways that I didn't think was so close to home, right? I think that because the politicians talk so much about the good work they're doing and about reaching out to communities, you think that all these things aren't, you're not encountering this back home, but you are, right? And I think that was really eye-opening. When I went to distribute solar lamps, there was this one, particular community that I went to, Loíza, which is the first community that I studied, right? With Light and Hope, I had this one mission of going to this one town, Loíza, which was impacted by both Hurricanes Irma and Maria, which came subsequently 2 weeks after each other. And, you had houses that were, wooden, basically all blown away. You had all their belongings on the ground, and it was it seemed like there was like a nuclear apocalypse that happened, right? And it was crazy to think that this distribution happened in December, and it'd been already 3 months, and still help hadn't gotten there, right? But I think as I saw people's shows of hope when I gave them their solar lamps and their washing machines, and people, their faces would bright up in immense ways, I think that that's really what kept me going, right? Seeing the impact that I was having firsthand on communities, right? And going to the 17 different towns that I went to, I saw a lot of different faces, and I saw a lot of signs of hope, right? And I think that their interest and kind of their good feeling from the work that us young people are doing is inspiring, and I think that generally moves all of us. And I think that should move also our older leaders, right? The fact that people are acknowledging us and being inspired by the work we do and also benefiting from the work we do, right? Like I said, we're not incumbent, politicians right now. We're not in huge positions of powers. We're, local people who do work in our own communities, but that end up having a global impact.
Autumn, they're talking about climate change. There's, of course, broad public support for action, but as Greta was saying earlier, nothing's happening with emissions. What, if not the work you're doing and that others around the world are doing to bring attention to this, what will it take to actually, do you think, see change in the numbers?
Well, to see change, I think that what we need to do is start getting more people and more youth, not only from Canada, but from all over the world, and empowering other kids to stand up like how we are. And I think that what we're doing right now is empowering them, because being at the World Economic Forum, we're on a global stage, and everyone's going to be watching this. And what we say right now is going to make an impact on everyone watching. And so, like, even for me, people are awarding me for, oh, you're doing such a great job. But I don't want your awards. If you're going to award me with helping me find solutions, award me with helping me make change. And I feel that's what I would want to see, is more people trying to help us with what we're trying to achieve.
Do you have questions for each other? Salvador, anything you want to ask others on the panel?
Put me on the spot here. No, I mean, I think we're already on the spot being here in the first place.
You're all, I think one of the things that's amazing about all of you is that you are, I mean, we're students of yours, but in addition to the work you're doing, you're all literally students. And you're students of history, I know. Do you see, you know, when you read about, study past youth movements over the decades, is this moment different? Do you think there's something different happening, or are you part of a multi-generational pattern of youth activism?
No, I think that this is a particularly strong time in history, right? I think that there's never been with all the history books that we've read and all that, there's never been a time in which youth movements have catalyzed so much and have gotten so much attention. I mean, at the turn of the century, the internet wasn't even that big, but now we have all this outreach and all this kind of exposure, right? And I think that 20 years ago, it was inconceivable for people our age to be at such a stage here. But I think it's never before seen. It's unprecedented, I would say, right? And I think that it's a sign of the times, right? I think that it's really important to acknowledge, you know, the fact that things are changing, right? And I feel like it's also the urgency of the issues, you know, climate issues, health issues, right? Political issues. I think that, you know, the more exposure we get and as more time passes, we see how, you know, older people and our leaders see how we have perspectives to share, right? And how we could even, I would go as far as say that we could even mentor our leaders in a lot of ways, right? There's a lot of things that are being done in ways that shouldn't be done, right? And I think we have great perspectives to share on that.
Just to add on to what he's actually said, I like that he's mentioned how we have access to all these different devices and platforms to actually express ourselves and, you know, just raise awareness on whatever we want to raise awareness on. But then we've got, in contrast with what used to happen, I'm from Africa, I'm Zambian, and so I see many young people, of course. We have so many young people, brilliant ideas, and, you know, they can articulate the problem for you. Like A to Z, they will tell you the problem. And I don't think it's just a Zambian thing. I think it's generally everywhere. People can easily identify what the problem is, and then sort of acting and bringing out the solution is where many people are, you know, that's where the platform comes in. And I think with the knowledge and exposure that we have right now, it's good for this generation because away from just looking at what the problem is, we have people that we could use as inspirations that we could match out to, and we could say, okay, they did this, then we can do this. But then it's also easier to identify what the solution is because we can look at best practices from before and then just bring that and integrate it into our fights. So that's something that we really need to do. But then I feel as though right now, Gen Z is a very active, very loud, and, you know, it's very powerful. But then to an extent, sometimes it's not as daring as we would wish for everyone else to be. You know, like this current generation, of course, we do have, you know, exceptionals. We do have exceptions, rather. But then, like, right now, I feel as though we could be a bit more louder. We could be a bit more on the ground. But then, you know, it's social media. Let's tweet. Let's do this. And it's very powerful, of course. But then I feel as though our collaborative efforts could be more, we could be more on the scene if we came together and used platforms such as strikes, for instance, and all that. And if we could see that going on around the world and not just in particular places, then I feel it would be more powerful. And that's something I think the past generation did a little better than us, being more involved on the ground than other just, you know, following up and everything else is something that we lack. But I feel as though we have diverse knowledge, we have people who can articulate issues and everything else, but then we just need more actors on the ground to just step up and say, we'll do this, and we're daring enough to actually foster the change that we want to see.
So there's a power in social media, but also a danger that we're staring at our phones instead of marching with our feet.
Yes,
right.
So that's something we need to.
So we've talked about politics, we've talked about business, we've talked about youth. We haven't talked about media. And you're all covered by people like me all the time. What can the media, what are we doing wrong, I guess? What could we do better? Maybe a better way to put it. Autumn, you have thoughts on the role of the media in amplifying your work or these issues that that what anybody have experience, positive or negative, with people like me?
Well, I think media is a really big part of the work we do because a lot of it is online. And I just think that when it comes to people that are, I just want to say this one thing, is like, if you have negative things to say online to us, just don't even try and do that. Like, it's so wrong, and we're just trying to do good things. And if you have negative comments about it, just please don't, like, try and, say this to us, because we're just trying to do good things. And that's the thing, is that there's always going to be negative people and positive people online, and we're really just trying to maybe even change the minds of the people that think negatively about the things we do. So yeah, I just think that media does have a really big impact on what we do.
I could probably add on because I've been in the media for quite some time. And I do believe, I actually had a conversation with Salvador the other night, and we were talking about how sometimes it's just a matter, the media thinks as though, the power lies in all these things and what people are talking about, but then they actually have the power to make this a huge conversation. It's all in the media. So the media has got, the power to shape the minds of what we have and, put us at the center of any conversation. But then it's just sometimes people don't necessarily find interest in such issues. It's 1 or 2 days, there's going to be the World Economic Forum, and then afterwards it's like no one wants to follow up the story or anything like that. And mostly it's the juicy stuff, like an argument between a politician and a young activist, and this and that, and it's all negatives, and sort of brings people to a point where sometimes the situation is not even as bad as it looks, but because the media exaggerates it, it makes it harder. So I really think the media can be very supportive in amplifying the voices and works of different young people in different communities and societies. It would be really good, because then it also starts reshaping the minds of people to realize that young people are powerful enough to do it, and they can also find ways to support us. And then secondly, the media should just be heavily involved in bringing hope, because sometimes that's all that we need. I love the quote that I heard last night, and he was talking about everything we do with hope. And so if the media has that much power to bring hope and entice hope in everyone for us to actually be part of the solution, then that would be a great thing. And the media is really just, it's considered the fourth estate of government. That's how powerful it is. It's a tool that can foster any agenda. With the media, we can do so much. And so I believe the media is very powerful and very instrumental in our work. All it has to do is just realize that they are the ones who determine how big this goes. And so if they could amplify the works and, the stuff we're doing, the young people, such forums as well, and just educate and enlighten the society, then we'll do a lot more.
Great. I'm just looking over fabulous questions from the audience. Here's one. You mentioned your hopes that the next generation of politicians will be more receptive. Do you think that's realistic, or will politicians always fall into the same power traps?
I mean, I think that the fact that we're doing the work we're doing at so young, I think that's kind of inspiring in a lot of ways. I think we're not going down that path of becoming insatiable with power. I think that in a lot of ways, I mean, I'd like to assume that our politicians right now will see the tide shifting, will see the work we're doing, and will allow us to have, 7 generations ahead of youth, right? I'd like to think that, right? But at the same time, that requires change, and that requires people, like you said, to be receptive. And I think that people need to stop thinking, about political parties, about left, right, whether this benefits me or not, whether this makes me money or not. I think people need to start thinking about how we can make the world a better place for everyone, right? Seeing ourselves instead of through our borders as citizens of the world, right? We can't live in a divided world, right? We're all living on the same planet. And, if we mess it up, that's the end game.
Go ahead.
I would just like to answer, do you think that is realistic, or they fall into the same power traps? I do think it's very realistic, and like he mentioned, there's so much that we can look forward to, and there's a lot of hope that we can actually step into, but then this will need a lot of investment, and it will need a lot of mentorship, like we mentioned earlier on. And honestly, I do have a lot of hope for the future heads of states and the future, leaders in political areas and all those things. But then I really think it is realistic, but it also depends on how much we decide to invest in us now for later on.
There are a lot of questions here about how you deal with negativity, which, I think, Autumn, you mentioned. And I would love, maybe each of you could just say a word about, we've talked a lot about the inspiration and hope you're bringing to others, but obviously there's a flip side to that. And what can we all learn from all of you about how you deal with the haters?
Well, for me, me and my mom do get a lot of negativity, and what we do is we just ignore it, because that's their own opinion, and it's not really our problem, because what we're trying to do is positive, and we're all trying to do is positive. So I just think that ignoring it's probably just the best way to go.
Greta?
I would like to say something that I think people need to know more than how I deal with haters. So I have some remarks I would like to give.
Please.
I will speak later today, so I just want to take this opportunity to once again remind everyone of our current situation. In Chapter 2 on page 108 in the SR 1.5 IPCC report, they came out in 2018, it says that if we are to have a 67% chance of limiting the global average temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees Celsius, we had on January 1st, 2018, about 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit in that budget. And of course that number is much lower today, as we emit about 42 gigatons of CO2 every year, including land use. With today's emissions levels, that remaining budget is gone within less than 8 years. These numbers aren't anyone's opinions or political views. This is the current best available science. Though many scientists suggest these figures are too moderate, these are the ones that have been accepted through the IPCC. And please note that these figures are global and therefore do not say anything about the aspect of equity, which is absolutely necessary to make the Paris Agreement work on a global scale. And that means that richer countries need to get down to zero emissions much faster, and then help poorer countries do the same, so that people in less fortunate parts of the world can raise their living standards. And these numbers also don't include most feedback loops, non-linear tipping points, nor additional warming hidden by toxic air pollution. Most models, however, assume that future generations will, will somehow be able to suck hundreds of billions of tons of CO2 out of the air with technologies that do not exist today in the scale required, and perhaps never will. The approximate 67% chance is the one with the highest odds given by the IPCC, and now we have less than 340 gigatons of CO2 left to emit in that budget to share fairly. And why is it so important to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius? Because even at 1 degree, people are dying from climate change. Because that is what the United Science calls for, to avoid destabilizing the climate so that we have the best possible chance to avoid setting off irreversible chain reactions. Every fraction of a degree matters. Since last summer, I've been repeating these numbers over and over again in almost every speech. But honestly, I don't think I have once seen any media outlet or person in power communicated this and what it means. I know you don't want to report about this. I know you don't want to talk about this. But I assure you I will continue to repeat these numbers until you do.
We have 3 or 4 minutes left, and I'd like to give everybody on the panel a chance to kind of deliver a message to the people collected here in Davos. What's your message that you'd like to leave with all of us?
My message would basically just be, like we've been mentioning, it's basically investing and involving young people in all these decision-making processes. But then for every individual here, what I would really like all of us to go back home with is the idea and the realization that the power that we're trying to speak to, the truth and the power that we're trying to speak here is not going to happen just because we have powerful individuals in the room. It's not going to take place, and the change we want to shape is not going to happen just because we're raising these issues. But it's going to happen when we imagine the change and then ask ourselves, what can we do about it? Who are we going to put pressure on? Who are we going to organize? How we mobilize it back home? And that's something I'm really going to carry home. But I urge everyone in here, it's not about being young or old. It's, of course, important that each of us realize what our strengths and weaknesses are. But then just ask yourself this one question. How will you be part of the change that we're trying to see? Thank you.
That was wonderful. I think that just because, we're on the stage, our age, just because we're all teenagers doesn't mean that we don't have the maturity, the knowledge, or the drive to take action and impart positive change in the world we live in, right? I think that our examples are very important for inspiration, for not only for our youth, but for our leaders that we have right now. The fact that we've been able to do amazing work at our young age is already a precedent establishing that for future generations, we'll only get younger and we'll do more change, the younger we get. I think that the media has an extremely important role to play. I think that our stories are very inspiring. I think that our stories are important not only just to share, to inspire others, but I think to make sure that people are being aware of what's happening around the world. I think that the media is a lot of times covers things that are pretty inconsequential. I think that these are I don't mean to offend anyone, but I mean like these are positive stories that are really important to share. And I think that a lot of times we get stuck in a lot of talk, but I think that it's really important to get the positive stories out there, the inspiring stories out there, and I think that it's important to drive more youth to take more action around the world. And I think that this is definitely a medium that could be very helpful for that.
Autumn?
Well, I would just like to say something is that even the fact that us youth have to be up here trying to create awareness and make change, I feel is almost kind of wrong, and we shouldn't be having to do this. And then the other thing I want to say is that my Auntie Josephine always had a little quote. She used to say, if you had an idea or a way you could, an idea, she'd always just say, just do it. So I just want to say that if you have an idea or a solution or a way you can help us, just do it. So.
That seems like a terrific place to wrap it up. I want to thank all of you for the work you're doing, for the inspiration you bring to so many of us, for the advice and reverse mentorship, as we were talking about before. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody in the audience did, so thank you.
Asseyez-vous au moins.